your message to voters in the 2nd District as you go around and say, you've got a ballot with 2 names on it, choose me?
Sure.
Thank you for the question. So as I've been knocking doors and talking with people all over the 5 counties of northern Utah, I have shared just the same message. I am not a go-along to get along candidate. I will go to D.C. and I will fight for you. And I've heard a resounding response from the residents there. They are very concerned about the gridlock, the corruption, the inaction in Congress. They want to see somebody that will go in, that will anchor, that will represent the values that northern Utahns hold dear.
I wanted to ask about something you said in the debate about the $1 billion that President Trump has pledged for the Great Salt Lake, that you raised concerns about where it was being spent, just, like if this was leading to more of the deficit. Does this mean you do not support the $1 billion for the Great Salt Lake?
So I want to truly understand what we're going to do with the $1 billion with a finite resource, right? And there are things we can do, certainly. There's a lot of desalination that is already, we are 100% reuse in a lot of places. We've sent a delegation to learn about Israel's efforts with desalination, and we are looking at implementing that in southern Utah as well. Actually encouraging other states. We've had conversations, for instance, with California to have them utilize that as kind of an easing on the demand for the Colorado River Compact. So there are lots of conversations happening around water already. My concern is that every dollar that the federal government spends just increases the inflationary pressures on Utahns, and we are feeling it. We're feeling it in the cost of housing, groceries, gas, and we have to be able to provide some relief by stopping that out of control spending.
Do you believe political violence is an issue on the right and the left? And if you do, what do you plan on doing about it?
So I believe that any political violence is wrong. And I have certainly led in my career as a legislator and as a city council person who's received multiple death threats for legislation that I've passed, and actual people have been arrested and detained because of the legitimate descriptions of violence that they would do to me because of just political speech, right? Like, I've been an example of saying, no, like, we need to turn the temperature down. We need to listen to each other, and we need to be open to having conversations across the aisle. And I've been an example of that in the legislature. You can talk with my colleagues across the aisle, and I've helped many of them with their legislation and making it so that it's a conservative policy that can pass, a deep red state. And so it's just important to have those conversations, to listen to each other, and to know that violence is never an answer.
On the point of federal spending and you wanting to bring that in, I'd like to ask about a couple of pieces of a couple of expenditures being asked for by President Donald Trump's administration that have made headlines in recent weeks, and your position on those. One is the anti-weaponization fund set up by President Trump's Justice Department that would seek to reimburse individuals who were at the Capitol on January 6th and claim they were unfairly investigated or prosecuted. And another is the ballroom that is being built onto the White House of the Trump administration. The budget for that has continued to grow.
Thank you. So I have some opinions on that anti-weaponization fund, and here's the thing. It's enjoined in the courts right now, and the courts are going to decide, right? That is not something that's currently moving forward, and there's certainly a lot of questions about, can a candidate negotiate a payout that then, is funneled to other individuals who have no relation to the claim at all before the government. And so there are issues and concerns, and the courts will decide. As far as the ballroom, look, what the president does with the budget, that's between him and Congress. If I were in Congress, I would have encouraged not renovating.
You acknowledge that you have voted both for and against tax breaks on data centers. Can you kind of explain?
Across the board.
Across the board.
Yeah, I've voted for tax incentives and against tax incentives, depending on the context.
Okay, so if it's fair to sort of take a different approach for each policy, what do you make of Blake Moore's answer on the Prop 4 situation? Is it not okay for him to, have supported this in 2018 but feel differently about the outcome in 2026?
Well, I think that feeling differently about the outcome is one thing, but when he's repeatedly doubled down in front of the media and on his social media, defending his stance and even suggesting that it was a principled stance and that he expects blue states to then do their fair share and give seats to Republicans, which we know is never going to happen, and hence my question about, is it naivete or is it just gaslighting the public? Which one is it? Because there's been a lot of doubling down on that issue. And so, you know, I get that he's trying to walk back his comment or his co-sponsorship of Prop 4 by saying that he feels that the judge should have actually turned it back over to the legislature. But when it ended up in the courts and that process was time limited and that judge waited until the very end of that deadline to then issue a decision and put the legislature, the lieutenant governor in a difficult spot. I mean, those were all repercussions that when you turn something like that over to the courts, you have to anticipate.
Would you be hitting him on Prop 4 if Republicans had ended up with a seat in CD1?
I think yes, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I didn't vote for Prop 4 when it was on the ballot in 2018. I don't support it. I differentiate between initiatives and referendums. Referendums have been around in America since before we were a country. There were ordinances for the 13 colonies, in some of the 13 colonies and some of the municipalities where they had the people's veto. But initiatives are the brainchild of progressives in the early 1900s, late 1800s. They came to Utah, they came to a few states. Less than half the states in America have an initiative process, and it's very problematic. When you look at the implications for, say, a legislature, are we supposed to, with this judicial decision, have two different websites, one for code that's passed by initiative and one for code that's passed by the legislature? And how does that play out? And how do the people then look to that? If there's a change to be made, an amendment to an initiative, do we just wait for every 2 years and put it on the ballot at a price tag of $2 million to go back to the citizens to ask for a change? For instance, when Prop 4 passed, it was patently, facially unconstitutional. The supporters of Prop 4 came to the legislature and asked us to make changes, which we did. So, and then, you know, we got sued. So that's the conversation. How does this work in our society, in our state, to make sure that people know what the law is and can follow the law? So that's just a concern I have with the process of initiatives generally. I 100% support referendum process. It's very important for the people to have the right to veto what their elected officials do.
Your opponent is a Utahn in Republican leadership at Washington. So how would unseating him benefit, you know, Northern Utah voters?
Well, you know, leadership isn't just a title. It's how you show up for the people that you serve. And I can say as a member of House leadership in Utah for 4 years and not a member before and after, that I can show up for my constituents in the same way because I've built trusted relationships with those that I work with, and I can get things done for them. And I can do the same thing in Congress.
What do you make of sorry, Hugo, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
What specifically about his performance, though, do you find insufficient up in Congress?
So what I've found with Blake in the 6 years that he's been in office is he comes to Utah and he rails against the budget process, he rails against the deficit spending, but then he goes back and he votes for omnibus bills, he votes for continuing resolutions that do nothing to rein in federal debt. Americans are tired of hearing one thing and seeing another. We need leadership who will do what they say they will do.
Did you have an issue with an initial moderator scheduled for this debate, like some reporting is suggesting?
I did not.
You didn't complain or anything?
I did not.
No? Okay.
Thank you for the question.
On the issue of data centers, what role do you see Congress having, given that there is some concerns that the American public does have about these things, about the impacts and things? So what do you see Congress doing, and what would your role be, I guess?
Well, certainly there's been some action in D.C. to try to just forward the idea that this is a national security issue and have those important conversations. And certainly, we do not want to be behind the 8 ball when it comes to national security. But I think this is more of a local issue when you talk about the process, when you talk about the impact studies, when you talk about we have to make sure that we have the water here. And you know what? That large load data center is going to go in somewhere in the United States. I mean, Kevin O'Leary said it was going to go in somewhere in the United States. It may be that Utah is not the best place for a large load data center that's heavily reliant on water, especially in our prolonged drought cycle. We are bringing in, I think, over 20 other smaller data centers across Utah. And so we're not saying no to data centers, but we need to be careful and we need to have public input and a better process across the board.
That's all the time. Thank you.
Thank you.